Good morning, colleagues. A warm welcome that you could come here to our press conference today. It's a great pleasure to introduce you to our three panelists here. I would like to start with Dr. Henriette Hutabarang-Lebang, and it's something special today because she's the first president we have on this table. So thank you so much for coming. And Madame Hutabarang-Lebang comes from, she's a president from Asia of WCC, and she comes from the Toraja Church in Indonesia. She's chairperson of Bible Society in Indonesia and chair of advisory board of Communion of Churches in Indonesia. A warm welcome to Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson. She's an Associate General Minister and Vice President for wider church ministries and comes from the UCC, United Church of Christ. Welcome, Thompson. And Reverend Dr. Gordon Coens, he's the regional coordinator for WCC Eden and from the Caribbean and the United Church of Jamaica. Warm welcome. Thank you. I would like to start with you, Dr. Coens. Please make your statement, and after your statement, we go on with Mrs. Thompson and Mrs. Hutabarang-Lebang, and then the journalists are allowed to ask their questions. Please.
Thank you so much. It is my great pleasure to be here and to be able to seek to represent concerns of persons with disability. EDAN is the Ecumenical Disabilities Advocates of the World Council of Churches, and I have been privileged to be the coordinator within the Caribbean for many years. I also have a deep sense that I come from a part of the world in which injustice is part of our lived experience. We cannot approach life without knowing that those of us who live in the Caribbean and who are Africans in the diaspora are the descendants of the horrible experience of slavery, and that the matters which must correct this part of our life and to bring justice to our thinking of ourselves is very much a part of our responsibility in this generation as well. In the matter of disabilities, when church folk, when Christians speak of the disabilities and the church's response, very often the question is whether it is an issue of justice or an issue of compassion. And I believe that we need to speak very directly and clearly on this, that in fact, the matters relating to disability are issues of justice, or most too often injustice. The disability community within the church and throughout the world isn't asking for charity and sympathy. Within the church, we need to remind ourselves that the God of love is also that God of justice. And the disability concerns in the world has improved significantly since the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability has been promulgated through the United Nations. And every church in every location, everywhere in the world, needs to face the question that exclusion of any person is injustice. It is sin. Persons with disability are made in the image of God, like are all others of God's creation. And so justice is what should lead us along the way towards the reconciliation for which we hope. It begins with recognizing sin, repenting, to be truly sorry of our work, wherever we work, to exclude anyone who should be also be a part of a church that ought to be a church of all and for all. And then, having responded with true repentance, change must take place. Over the last 20 years, I've seen significant change here at the World Council of Churches. And yet at the local levels, in too many of our denominations and congregations, the persons with disability are not being sent forward with the kinds of opportunities so that the World Council of Churches at this level would be able to fully engage. This issue is not about simply thinking of how to create ramps. For ramps are very important for those who have ambulatory challenges, and access is to be provided, and all avenues must be taken to remove obstacles that stand in the way, that disable people, that make us unable to be present. But also, persons with disability have something to offer, and the church is not fully, not wholly the body of Christ until all of God's humanity is available to be involved and to participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Cohens. Dr. Thompson.
Good morning. It is also a pleasure for me to be present with you. This morning's plenary brought much-needed attention and awareness to the challenges which require the prioritization of gender justice globally and within the fellowship of the World Council of Churches. The challenges facing women are at pandemic proportions, as women around the world continue to struggle to maintain and care for themselves and for their families. Women are among the lowest socially in many communities and continue to be oppressed with the problems related to wages, earning power, employment, and are unable to live with the fullness of dignity and respect afforded as a part of their human rights. Inequities and inequalities continue to rise. According to the 2021 Global Gender Report from the World Economic Forum, women globally earn 37% less than men in similar roles. As the report states, progress on closing the gender gap is painfully slow, and at the rate that we are going, it will take 267.6 years before women are able to achieve gender parity. Our quest for gender justice must include identifying the challenges facing women, it must include global advocacy, and it must include women's empowerment. I also want to note that gender-based violence is a major challenge for women, although women are not exclusively affected by gender-based violence. The years of the COVID-19 pandemic have amplified the problems facing women, as many have had to shelter in place in homes that were unsafe and with individuals who were perpetuating violence against them. Gender-based violence refers to harmful acts that are directed at an individual based on their gender. It is rooted in gender inequality, the abuse of power, and harmful norms. Gender-based violence is a serious violation of human rights and a life-threatening health and protection issue. It is estimated that 1 in 3 women will experience sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. Gender-based violence can include sexual, physical, mental, and economic harm inflicted in public or in private. It also includes threats of violence, coercion, and manipulation. And this can take place with as intimate partner violence, sexual violence, child marriage, female genital mutilation, and so-called honor crimes. As we in this community, that is the World Council of Churches, and as people of faith, continue to examine the disparities that exist in gender around the world, it is going to be important for us to find ways to continue to be engaged, to address these issues, and I think most of all, to call out the ways in which the church itself continues to support structures that contribute to gender disparities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. And now I go on to President Dr. Huda Barak Lebang.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this sharing. And today, our plenary is basically focused on seeing the intersection of human dignity and justice through the lens of gender, disability, youth, and race. I will share a little bit from my perspective as Asian. Asia is a pluralistic continent in terms of ethnicities, even Indonesia, ethnicities, races, religions, social, and etc. So it's a very, how do you call that? It's a very complex society. Nevertheless, in most of the Asian traditional culture, respect to each other is a main important thing. We welcome everybody. You know, if somebody passed my house, for instance, in the traditional, when I was little, my grandma always say, she doesn't know the person. She didn't know. But she said, please come. Come, come, come. And while we are eating, they say, let's eat, let's eat. And then I ask, why you invite them? The food will not be enough. And my grandma said, the rice is not lesser than us. We are not more than the rices. In other words, sharing is an important value in the society. And I think that in some culture as well, like Africa and etc. So many cultures, many religions. In Indonesia, we have 700 ethnics and languages. So it's a very, But deep in our heart, there is a spirituality, that was taught by our grandparents to us, like what I just shared. That is actually the spirituality of local people, local community, helping each other, sharing to each other. Although we have social structure, traditional social structure, that often marginalize some people, like women, or even, people hide their children with disabilities, And also youth, consider as, you don't speak too much, you're still young, something like that. So there is already embedded discrimination in our upbringing, in our socialization process. So we have that. And with the coming of the development, especially with globalization, economic globalization become the key issue. So people compete against each other to get the benefit from the development, which further marginalize those who are already in the periphery. The how do you call that? The gap, economic gap, it's prevalent in the society. The rich become richer, the poor become poorer. And this is and sometimes these economic discrepancies go together along with the racist discrimination, along with the age, along with the gender discrimination. So it makes the situation become more difficult. How do we respond to that? There are many responses. As World Council of Churches, we take this issue seriously. But also the local churches do things according to their culture. In Indonesia, I can say the case of Indonesia, recently, seeing all this development, people become greedy, want to get more and more, even kill each other for the sake of achieving their agenda. Yeah. So the churches in Indonesia say, no, stop it. We need to develop spirituality, what we call spiritualitas keugaharian, spirituality of moderation. In terms of food, let's say if it is enough, enough. Don't consume more than what your body don't need. You know, we come from the poor families. Sometimes we collect things because we think about our families. Yeah, that is usually we do that. And sometimes, even when the economy getting better, we continue to do that. Stop it. Think about other people who don't have anything to eat. Also, with regard to the attitudes towards nature, exploitation against nature. That's also something that we have to spiritually address. Yeah. Spiritually of moderation. If you cut the trees, please think about other trees to, how do you call that? To plant other trees so that you do not experience the flood and other natural disaster. We have many natural disasters. Of course, how do you call that? We have many natural disasters. We also have these volcanoes in our countries. So a lot of, natural disaster happen. But more so, our water were polluted by the, how do you call that, garbage that people throw away in the river or in the sea. And this is the thing that we say we need to also treat our environment friendly. And actually, in my culture, there is an expression about, the unity of human being with all creatures. We are part of the creation of God. The things that we plant, but also we need to take over or taking care of our environment because Earth is our home. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hutabarat Lebang. Now it's up to you. Please ask your questions. I start with Johannes Wendnagel. He will probably speak in German.
Perhaps I tried in English right now. It's a short and easy question to Mrs. Thompson. The question is for women being ordained a case of gender justice? If yes, what is the situation in the WCC right now? And what is your personal roadmap to perhaps improve things in this case?
I do believe that the ordination of women continues to be a gender justice issue in the fellowship. However, I think that within the fellowship, there are a multiplicity of issues on which we don't agree, and that is one of them. So clearly, there are multiple traditions among us that do not ordain women. I am ordained, and as an ordained woman, I still, on occasion, do experience what it means to be discriminated against in the fellowship because I'm a woman. It has nothing to do with the title I carry, right? So I do think that there is an ongoing need for us as women to continue to advocate within the fellowship. One, I think, is the issue around ordination. Once we're ordained, there's also the issue of shared power. So what it means for women to be in leadership and for those positions of leadership that are held by women to be equally valued and equally seen in the fellowship. So I think the issue of ordination is probably the tip of the iceberg, because once ordained, there is still the question of how we are included in leadership in the life of the fellowship, but also even within the denominations in which we are ordained. And how much we are paid, because usually that's not equitable either.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Dirk Halberman.
Yes, good morning. It's basically a follow-up to my colleague's question. I would like to ask Ms. Thompson on gender equality and gender diversity in the World Council of Churches. You have mentioned the lack of women in leadership already. And if you look at the top jobs like the moderator or the secretary general, it's clearly dominated by middle-aged white men. There has been only one female moderator so far, and all the secretary generals have been male so far. So how do you want to change that? How do you want to push for more gender equality or gender parity in the World Council of Churches and the leadership positions? Thank you.
Well, let me just speak from the North American perspective for a second. In our North American delegation, for the first time, there were actually very few, if no white men, who came as delegates. Now, I'm certainly not saying that we go to a zero compliance here. That's not the role. However, if we are not willing to change the delegations that we bring into these spaces, if we're not willing to bring the representation of women, people of color, persons with disabilities, and other marginalized peoples, then the fellowship does not change, because it is out of the representation that is present that leadership is chosen. So it's really incumbent on each of us in many of our settings, because women are not ordained. The number of ordained women who are present tend to be lower, and the representation coming from those church communities tend to be men. So it's not just that we have an overflow of middle-aged white men. I would say that we have too many middle-aged men. And so I think that it's really not just about pushing from outside, because in this case, if you're not at the table, it's hard to impact change. And those of us who are at the table continue to ask for, to suggest, and to strongly recommend that those changes happen. And I do think that there's a point of resistance that will need to happen to say that structural change has to come in order for anything different to be realized in the leadership of the council, but also in the leadership of our churches globally.
You want to add something? Dr. Udaba Lebang, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think I agree with Karen about that. WCC is fellowship of the churches, and therefore, whatever we do here, if we commit to the inclusive participation, then the delegates has to reflect that. The delegate has to reflect that. Otherwise, we will face the same situation. We have difficulty to find youth. We have difficulty. So, in that regard, the leadership development is very important. Ecumenical leadership development is very important. Because I think, coming to the global ecumenical meeting like this, it also needs some background at home. Yes. Of the involvement in the ecumenical leadership development, become the ecumenical practitioner in our own churches and in our own country, so that we can come and contribute what we experience ecumenically in our churches or in our country to the global ecumenical family, including the inclusiveness, I would say. Inclusivity, include everybody, embrace all people. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? This is not the case. So I will close this press conference of today. Thank you so much for coming. Have a good afternoon and hope to see you tomorrow, same time, here at 11:15. And you get the invitation this afternoon. I forgot to invite you this afternoon. We will have the press briefing at 3:30 in the, far away from here, in the Landratsamt on the top level in the press center. And there will be, we will talk about climate destruction is violence against children, the Church's commitments to children's response,